The galaxy had a rule. When something unknown entered a system, you waited. It wasn't just protocol, it was survival, carved into history by the ruins of civilizations that had reacted too quickly. Empires older than memory had burned because they fired first. Entire species had vanished because they mistook curiosity for threat. So the rule endured, passed from council to council, from generation to generation. Observe, learn, then decide. The system had followed that rule for over 9,000 cycles. Until now, it began as a distortion. A faint ripple at the edge of long-range sensors, subtle enough to be dismissed as interference. But it didn't fade. It grew, warped, twisted into something no instrument could properly define. Then space broke. Not elegantly, not like the controlled folds of travel. This was violent, brutal. A jagged wound tearing open reality itself, stretching across millions of kilometers, bleeding light that shouldn't exist. And from that wound, something emerged. At first, the system flagged it as multiple contacts. Then a fleet. Then a swarm. But every recalculation collapsed into a single, impossible conclusion. It was one ship. A single vessel so vast that scale itself lost meaning. Its surface shifted constantly, layered plates sliding over each other like continents in motion. Veins of light pulsed beneath its armor, not mechanical, not electrical, something else, something alive. Across the defense grid, alarms ignited. Inside the command spire, High Commander stepped forward, her crystalline form refracting the chaotic light spilling from the main display. She had commanded fleets, crushed rebellions, and stared down enemies that once threatened the entire sector. But this wasn't an enemy she understood. "Report," she said, voice steady, but only just. "Mass readings unstable," a systems officer replied. "It exceeds our largest carriers by 70 times, possibly more." "That's not possible," another snapped. "Structural collapse alone." "It's not collapsing," a third interrupted quieter. "It's adjusting." Narrowed her gaze. "Energy signature." A pause. Then, "Undefined." "Explain." "It's not outputting energy like a reactor. It's not consuming fuel. It's present like a constant." A chill passed through the chamber. Then the ship spoke. Not through language. Through everything. Every communication channel, civilian, military, encrypted, lit up at once. Even dormant relays buried in dead satellites screamed to life. The signal had no origin, no frequency, no translation. Yet every mind understood it perfectly. Arrival confirmed. Silence followed. Not calm. Not peace. But the kind that comes just before something breaks. Felt it deep within her core, a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in centuries. Uncertainty. "Open communication," she ordered. "Identify them." "No response," the officer said, "or we can't detect one." The massive ship shifted. Not forward. Not accelerating. It simply was closer. One moment it hovered near the system's edge. The next, it loomed above the outer defense perimeter. As if distance meant nothing to it. "Commander," alarms flared. "It bypassed all approach vectors." "How?" someone whispered. No one answered. Because there was no answer. The fleet reacted on instinct. Thousands of warships powered up in unison, their crystalline hulls glowing as energy surged through weapon arrays. Drones launched in swarms, forming defensive grids. Targeting systems locked onto the impossible shape hanging in the void. The ancient rule echoed in Sm's mind. Wait. Observe. But the sight before her crushed that instinct. This thing had invaded their space. Ignored their defenses. Spoken without permission. And now it was moving closer. "Target lock confirmed," an officer said, voice tight. "Awaiting command." Hesitated. For a single heartbeat. Then, fire. The void erupted. Beams of concentrated stellar energy lanced across space, striking the massive hull in blinding flashes. Missiles followed, detonating with enough force to crack moons. The entire defense grid unleashed everything it had, Years of engineering, centuries of warfare knowledge poured into a single, overwhelming strike. Light swallowed the ship. Shockwaves rippled through space, distorting sensors and blinding half the fleet. Direct hits, someone shouted. Multiple impacts confirmed. Hope flickered. Leaned forward. Damage report. The light faded. And the ship was unchanged. No scars. No damage. Not even a mark. Instead, its surface shifted again, plates folding, glowing veins intensifying, as though it had merely noticed the attack. Then the signal returned. Stronger, closer, heavier, hostility acknowledged. Every screen flickered. For a fraction of a second, they saw something else. A figure, humanoid, standing within a vast chamber of steel and fire. Watching, judging, then the image vanished. Commander and officer whispered, "What is that?" Didn't answer, because outside, the ship began to unfold. Not weapons, something worse. Space itself started to bend around it. Stars stretched into thin lines. Light twisted, dragged toward its center as if reality was losing its grip. Felt it then. Not fear. Not yet. Something deeper. A realization forming too late. All units, her voice faltered, fall back. But even as the fleet tried to retreat, the distortion intensified. The wound in space trembled again. And this time, it wasn't opening. It was preparing to take something away. And in that moment, High Commander understood one terrible truth. They hadn't just encountered something unknown. They had provoked it. The first thing that died was certainty. Across the system, thousands of ships held formation, weapons still glowing from the opening strike. Every sensor screamed conflicting data. Every system tried and failed to explain what they were seeing. Because the ship hadn't retaliated. Not yet. It simply remained. Massive, silent, watching. High Commander stood motionless, her crystalline form dimmer than before. Around her, officers whispered in fractured voices, their confidence unraveling with every passing second. "Commander, it's not charging weapons," one said. "Then what is it doing?" another demanded. The answer came slowly. The ship opened. Not like a warship preparing to fire. Not like any structure built for battle. Its outer layers peeled back in vast, deliberate movements, revealing deeper sections beneath, each one more complex, more alien than the last. It was like watching something breathe, unfolding layer by layer until a core became visible at its center. A light, blinding, pure, but wrong. "Energy readings?" asked. The sensor officer hesitated. "It's not building energy in any measurable way. There's no increase, no spike, it's just there." "Define there." "I can't." The core pulsed once, and every system in the fleet flickered. A wave, not of force, not of heat, but something else rippled outward, touching every ship without damaging them. It was almost gentle. Almost. Then everything changed. "Commander," an officer shouted. "Frigate K-47 is breaking formation." His gaze snapped to the display. A single ship surged forward, engines burning at maximum output, leaving the defensive line behind. "Who authorized that?" she demanded. "No command input registered. They're not responding." The frigate's captain's voice burst across all channels, raw and desperate. "We can't wait for it to strike. If that's a weapon, we destroy it now." "Pull them back," ordered. "Override their systems." Trying, no response. It's like our commands aren't reaching them. The frigate raced toward the massive ship. Against that impossible scale, it looked insignificant, like a shard of glass flying toward a star. "Target lock confirmed," the captain shouted. "All weapons fire." Everything the frigate had erupted at once. Energy beams, missiles, kinetic rounds, every system pushed beyond safety limits in a single, desperate assault. The attack struck the exposed core. And for a moment, it flickered. Across the command deck, hope ignited like a dying spark. "Did we?" someone whispered. Then, the frigate vanished. No explosion. No debris. No trace. It simply ceased to exist. Silence slammed into the room. "What happened?" an officer breathed. "Scan for wreckage," another shouted. "Any residual anything." "Nothing," the sensor officer said, voice trembling. "No mass, no heat, no fragments, it's gone." His voice was steady, but cold. "Replay." The footage appeared. The frigate advanced. Fired. The core flickered. Then, space around the ship distorted. Not outward. Inward. Like reality had been pulled tight, then snapped. And the frigate, caught in that impossible moment, was erased. Not destroyed. Not disintegrated. Removed. Stepped back slowly. "That wasn't a weapon," she said. The realization settled over the room like a shadow. It was a correction, as if something had decided that the frigate didn't belong there. And reality obeyed. The signal returned. Stronger, heavier, unmistakable. Interference removed. Panic spread instantly. "They're not attacking us," someone shouted. "They're editing us," another finished, voice breaking. The core pulsed again. But this time, it changed. The massive sphere of light began to contract, collapsing inward, growing smaller while becoming infinitely brighter. Sensors overloaded trying to measure it. "Energy density is spiking," the officer cried. "It's compressing into a single point." "How much power?" demanded. A long pause. Then, "It's reading as infinite." The word drained the room of breath. The point stabilized, then moved. Not toward the fleet. Not toward any ship. But toward a distant object, a barren moon orbiting the outer edge of the system. "Why target that?" someone asked. Didn't respond. Because she understood. "This is a message," she whispered. The point touched the moon. And the moon collapsed. Not shattered. Not exploded. It folded inward, compressed into nothingness in a silent, horrifying instant. Gone. No debris. No shockwave. Just absence. Every being in the system felt it, not physically but instinctively. A demonstration of absolute control. The signal followed. Colder than before. "Observe." His voice barely held together. "All units fall back, retreat immediately." But even as the fleet began to scatter, a new targeting pattern spread across every display. Not random. Not searching. Locked. A single point highlighted across all systems. And for the first time in their long, unchallenged history, an entire civilization understood something they had never truly felt before. They were not facing an enemy. They were facing something that decided whether they were allowed to exist. Panic didn't explode. It fractured. Across the system, order dissolved into something quieter, more dangerous. Ships didn't flee in chaos. They hesitated, drifting, waiting for commands that no longer made sense. Weapons powered down, then up again, then down, like soldiers unsure if the war had already ended. At the center of it all, High Commander stood frozen. Because the targeting lock hadn't moved. It remained fixed on there. Billions of lives reduced to a single glowing marker on every screen. "Open all channels," said voice sharp despite the tremor beneath. "Broadcast surrender protocols, full compliance now." "Transmitting," an officer replied. "All frequencies, all languages." Silence answered. Then, every display flickered. Not with static. With intention. The image formed slowly, as if something unfamiliar with reality was learning how to shape it. A chamber appeared, vast, metallic, dimly lit by a cold, pulsing glow. Walls of layered steel stretched into darkness, etched with patterns that seemed less like design and more like memory. And at the center, a figure, humanoid, still, watching. The room froze. Even the air felt heavier. "Commander," someone whispered, "is that them?" Didn't answer. She stepped forward instead. The figure moved. Not dramatically, just enough to confirm one truth. It was alive. And aware. Its eyes lifted, locking onto the camera, onto them, onto everything. There was no distortion now. No interference. The signal had become perfect. "You fired first." The voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried weight, like gravity wrapped in sound. Held her ground. "We acted to defend our system. You entered without." Without permission. The figure tilted its head slightly. "We did the same." A pause. Then, the chamber behind it shifted. The walls lit up. And the galaxy saw something it had never expected. Not power. Not threats. History. A world appeared lush, blue, vibrant. Then burning. Cities shattered under orbital fire, atmosphere igniting, oceans boiling into vapor. Another world. Different species. Different sky. Same ending. Fleets arriving. Weapons firing. Silence after. Extinction. The images accelerated. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. Civilizations meeting something unknown and choosing to strike first. Each time, they died. His voice faltered. "What is this?" The figure stepped forward. Memory. Another image appeared. A small blue planet. Clouds swirling gently across its surface. Unremarkable. Fragile. Then, ships arrived. Aliens. Cold. Efficient. The planet burned. Its defenses crumbled in moments. Cities turned to ash. Signals went silent. Felt something shift inside her. "This was your world." The figure didn't answer immediately. When it did, the voice was quieter. "Yes." Silence filled the chamber. Across the fleet, across the system, every watched. Not as soldiers, but as witnesses. "They destroyed you," said. "They tried." The next images changed. Fragments of that same species, humans surviving in scattered ships, broken fleets fleeing into darkness, resources failing, numbers dwindling. Desperation. Adaptation. Evolution. Their ships grew larger. Stronger. Stranger. Not bound by old physics. Not limited by old thinking. "We learned," the figure said. "We learned what the galaxy does to the unknown." The massive battleship outside pulsed in perfect synchronization with the words. "So we changed." The camera angle shifted subtly, revealing more of the chamber. It wasn't just metal. It was layered with something else, organic patterns woven into steel, like the ship itself was both constructed and grown. "We became what survives." Took a step forward. "And now," she asked, "what are you doing here?" The figure's gaze hardened. "Ensuring it doesn't happen again." A pause. Then, "To anyone." The targeting lock on the flickered brighter. "By threatening extinction," challenged. The figure didn't react. "By preventing the first mistake." The words hit harder than any weapon. "You're judging us for something we didn't know," said her voice rising. "Exactly." The answer was immediate. Cold. Final. "You didn't know." The chamber darkened slightly. The figure stepped closer to the unseen camera. Closer to them. "And you fired anyway." No one spoke. Because there was nothing to say. Outside, the massive ship shifted. Its structure realigned, focusing its immense presence toward a new point. Not the planet. Not the fleet. But something far greater. Sensors flared in alarm. "Commander," an officer shouted, "it's targeting the star." Score dimmed in shock. "That's impossible." But the readings didn't lie. The ship pulsed once, and the star flickered across the entire system, light dimmed by a fraction so small it shouldn't have mattered. Yet every living being felt it, because they understood what it meant. This wasn't destruction. This was control. Absolute. Terrifying. And the voice returned one final time. Lesson 1 was demonstration. The figure's eyes burned into theirs. Lesson 2 is consequence. The star dimmed again. And this time, it didn't stop. The star did something no one believed possible. It hesitated. Across the system, light should have been absolute, constant, unquestioned. But now it flickered like a dying thought, brightening, dimming, brightening again, each pulse weaker than the last. Panic turned into something colder. Understanding. High Commander stood at the observation chamber, watching her reflection fracture across the crystal viewport. Behind her, officers no longer shouted, no longer argued, they only watched. Because arguing implied control. And control no longer existed. The star is stabilizing, a sensor officer said, though his voice betrayed the lie in his words. It's responding to external influence. That's not possible, another whispered. You can't influence a stellar fusion process like that without collapsing. Unless you're not influencing it, said quietly. Silence followed. The massive human ship hovered beyond the fleet, its impossible hull still unfolding in slow, deliberate movements. It didn't rush. It didn't chase. It simply existed in a way that made everything else feel temporary. And then, the voice returned. Not through channels. Through everything. Surrender implies negotiation. The words resonated inside every mind simultaneously, bypassing technology entirely. Stepped forward. We are attempting communication. We are. You are reacting. A pause. The star dimmed again. This time slower. More deliberate. Entire systems across the fleet began to fail, not explosively but subtly. Navigation drifted. Energy reserves fluctuated. Even time-synced systems began to lose precision. It felt like reality was becoming less reliable. We didn't understand what you were, shouted. We followed defensive doctrine. The response came instantly. So did they. Images returned. Civilizations reacting to unknown vessels. First contact scenarios turning into firestorms. Fleets firing at signals. Stations firing at shadows. Each time the same outcome. Collapse. Erasure. Silence. His voice lowered, and you decided to become judge. The human figure appeared again within the ship's internal chamber. Same cold steel, same burning light behind their eyes. We decided to become a boundary. The star pulsed violently. A surge of energy rippled outward, then stalled, as if something was holding it in place. Commander, an officer shouted, the star's output is being regulated. Regulated by what? Snapped. The officer hesitated. By the ship. The realization hit like impact without force. The vessel wasn't just attacking systems. It was rewriting them. Controlling them. The human voice softened, just slightly. You are not the first to justify the first strike. The star dimmed further. Entire planets began to feel the change, temperatures dropping fractionally, ecosystems reacting instinctively to reduced energy. Nothing catastrophic yet. But it was coming. Clenched her fists. If you can speak, then you can reason. We are not your past enemies. A long pause followed. Then, correct. The word confused the bridge. Froze. The human continued. You are not them. A shift. Hope dangerous, fragile, flickered across the room. You are before them. The meaning landed slowly. We haven't committed your history, said carefully. No. The star flickered again. More violently now. But you will. Silence shattered the room. What does that mean? Someone whispered. The ship responded immediately. Every civilization believes it is the exception. The human figure stepped closer to the internal display. Until it is. Outside, the massive ship's structure rotated. Entire segments aligned like a vast, mechanical constellation. Power concentrated not into weapons, but into decision points. Systems preparing to enforce outcomes rather than cause damage. The star dimmed again, now noticeably unstable. His voice broke slightly. We can change, we can establish protocol, we can. You already did. The sentence was sharp. Final. You fired. A pause. Then. That is your protocol. The fleet trembled. Not physically, but emotionally. The realization that no apology, no reasoning, no political structure could undo what had already been interpreted as intent. A sensor officer suddenly spoke, voice shaking. Commander, if it continues regulating stellar output at this rate, the star will enter collapse phase. Meaning, asked though she already knew. The answer came anyway. System-wide extinction. Silence again. Heavier now. The human voice returned, but quieter. Less absolute. We are not here to destroy you. Looked up sharply. The figure met her gaze through impossible distance. We are here to ensure you learn what others did not live long enough to teach. The star pulsed once more, then stabilized, but only partially. Like a breath held halfway. The ship outside reconfigured again, and a new target lock appeared. Not on the fleet, but on something deeper, something foundational. The system's jump gates. All of them simultaneously activating. And the human voice delivered the final line like a warning carved into reality itself. Lesson 2 has begun. His eyes widened. Because if the gates fell, the galaxy itself would no longer be isolated. And whatever was coming next would not be contained. The first gate collapsed without sound. Across the system, the network of jump gates, ancient pillars of interstellar travel, had always been considered eternal. Built from materials that predated current empires, stabilized by mathematics no one fully understood, they were the arteries of civilization. Now they were flickering. One by one. Not exploding. Not failing. Being turned off. High Commander stood motionless in the command chamber as alarms screamed in layered harmonics. Each tone represented a gate losing coherence. Each silence that followed felt like something being erased from existence. This is impossible, a systems officer whispered. They're not being destroyed, they're being activation. By what? Someone snapped. No one answered. Because they already knew. Outside the fleet, the human vessel remained unchanged. Immense, patient, its shifting structure no longer focused on the star alone. Now it extended influence across the entire system architecture, like something mapping the bones of a living organism. Then the voice returned. Not loud, not emotional, just inevitable. You built pathways between stars without understanding what follows them. The chamber flickered. And then, the past came alive. Not as memory, as intrusion. Every ship, every station, every mind connected to the network was suddenly flooded with data that did not belong to them. Scenes unfolded without permission. Not just their history, but something older, something shared. Civilizations across the galaxy reacting to first contact. A pattern repeating. A fleet arriving. A signal ignored. A warning dismissed. Then fire. Always fire. Staggered slightly as the data pierced her perception. Stop this, she ordered. You're invading our systems. We are correcting perspective. The human figure appeared again inside the ship's internal chamber. This time closer, sharper, as if the boundary between observation and presence had weakened. Behind it, more images. A shattered Earth. Human fleets retreating into darkness. Then rebuilding. Then changing. Becoming something unrecognizable. The officer beside whispered, that is their origin. Didn't respond. Because she was watching something worse. The pattern continued, species after species encountering unknown signals and reacting the same way. Fear, preemption, attack, and extinction. The repetition was unbearable. "This is selection bias," said Weekly. "You're only showing." "All outcomes," the voice interrupted. A pause. "You survived long enough to question it." The implication landed heavily. Across the fleet, fear shifted shape. It was no longer fear of the ship. It was fear of the pattern. A young officer spoke, voice trembling. "Commander, what if this is what always happens? What if every civilization thinks they're the first to be right?" His gaze hardened. "We are not them." The human figure turned slightly. "That is what they all said." Silence followed. Then, the gates flickered again. Another one collapsed. Then another. The system's infrastructure was unraveling piece by piece, not violently but decisively, like a surgeon removing nerves. "Why are you doing this?" demanded. "If your goal is survival, why destabilize interstellar travel?" The answer came immediately. "Because distance creates assumption." A pause. "And assumption creates first strike." The star dimmed slightly again in the background, still under partial regulation. The system itself felt like it was being held between two forces, one sustaining, one restraining. Stepped forward. "You are forcing isolation." "We are enforcing reflection." The human figure raised a hand. And suddenly, the fleet saw something new. Not history, not war, but contact events that never happened. Ships arriving peacefully. Species observing instead of firing. Civilizations choosing patience. And thriving. Entire branches of galactic history branching into peaceful outcomes, only to collapse in timelines where fear won instead. His voice softened despite herself. "These are alternatives. These are possibilities." A heavier pause. "You chose none of them." The final gate flickered violently, then stabilized but locked. Sealed. Permanently inactive. The network went dark. Every ship now isolated. No escape routes. No reinforcements. No retreat. Just the system. And the ship. And the judgment. Realized it then. "This isn't containment," she whispered. The human voice responded gently. "No. A beat. It is prevention." The ship outside reoriented again. But this time, not toward destruction, toward enforcement. A new marker appeared across all displays. Not a planet, not a star, but the fleet itself. Every vessel, every life, individually tagged. And the voice delivered the final truth of the lesson. Lesson 3, consequences are not shared equally. His breath caught. Because she understood. The next action would not be system-wide. It would be selective. And somewhere in the silence between heartbeats, the ship began deciding. The fleet didn't move. Not because it couldn't, but because movement suddenly felt irrelevant. Across the system, thousands of warships hovered in fractured formation, their once proud geometry reduced to scattered hesitation. Engines burned softly, like dying embers refusing to go dark. Every vessel now carried the same realization. They were individually visible, individually judged. High Commander stood at the center of the command chamber, staring at the shifting tactical display. Every ship in her fleet now bore a designation marker, clean, precise, inescapable. Not grouped, not protected by formation. Separated. Commander and officer whispered, "We're being categorized." Didn't answer immediately, because she understood what that meant. Then the voice returned. Not from the fleet, not from the ship, from within the system itself. Lesson 3, consequences are not collective. The massive human vessel hung beyond the fleet, its structure now less chaotic and more deliberate. Segments aligned like a machine refining its purpose. The glow at its core was steady, no longer flickering, no longer demonstrating. Now it was deciding. One of the tagged ships suddenly shuddered. "Commander," a sensor officer shouted, "vessel is losing structural cohesion." On screen, the ship didn't explode. It simply unraveled. Matter separating at a molecular level, not violently, but as if the concept of its existence had been gently invalidated. Within seconds, it was gone. No debris. No signal. Just absence. His voice was tight. Was it armed? No, came the reply. It was idle, non-combatant support. Silence dropped like a weight. Another marker lit up. Then another. Panic threatened to rise again, but it was different now. Controlled, smothered, because panic implied unpredictability, and unpredictability had already been punished. "What criteria are you using?" demanded. "We are not a monolith, we have." "Choice." The human figure appeared again within the ship's internal chamber. "We are using choice." Stepped forward, explain. A pause. Then, images formed again. Not ancient wars this time. Not extinction events. But decisions. A fleet detecting an unknown signal. One captain hesitating. Another firing immediately. A third attempting communication, ignored, destroyed by Allied fire. The pattern repeated across scenarios. Always the same divergence point. Always the same outcome. "You are selecting individuals," said slowly, "based on reaction time. Based on intent." The answer was immediate. Cold. Precise. Intent becomes action when fear is unexamined. Another ship on the display flickered out of existence. The fleet finally reacted, not with attack, but with retreat attempts. Engines flared, wings of ships broke formation, some attempted to flee the system entirely. But the jump gates were gone. The network sealed. There was no exit. Only space. And judgment. "Stop running," ordered. "It will only escalate selection." But her voice was drowned by rising desperation. Ships scattered anyway. And the ship outside responded. Not aggressively. Systematically. A fleeing destroyer vanished mid-burn. A carrier attempting stealth displacement collapsed into silence. A relay ship broadcasting surrender codes disappeared without acknowledgement. Each disappearance was clean. Final. Unarguable. His fists tightened. "You're executing them. We are completing outcomes." The human figure stepped closer to the camera perspective again. "You mistake punishment for correction." The chamber behind it shifted. New imagery unfolded. Not destruction. Not war. But divergence maps. Every ship highlighted. Every decision path projected forward. Some lines led to survival. Most led to first strike. Stared at it, "You're predicting behavior. We are reading history." A pause. "You are all repeating it." Another ship vanished. The fleet was now visibly thinning. Not randomly. Not chaotically. But with terrifying order. "Commander," an officer said softly, "we can't win this." Didn't respond immediately. Because win was no longer a meaningful concept. She looked up at the massive vessel. For the first time, she saw it differently. Not as a weapon. Not as a predator. But as something shaped by loss so profound it had stopped believing in hesitation. "What do you want from us?" she asked finally. The human figure paused. Longer than before. Then, "Proof." The word hung in the chamber. "Proof of what?" asked. The answer came softly. "That you can see the first mistake before it becomes your last." The remaining ships flickered again. Another vanished. The fleet was now reduced by nearly a third. His voice dropped, "And if we fail?" A pause. The star above them dimmed slightly again. And the answer came like a verdict. "Then you become another lesson." The human figure turned away slightly, as if addressing something beyond the system. The ship outside began to reconfigure again. More precise now, less patient, and a new pattern emerged across every remaining vessel. A countdown, not to destruction, to decision. His breath slowed, because she finally understood. This wasn't a battle for survival. It was a test that could not be ignored. And somewhere in the quiet between collapsing ships, the galaxy itself was watching the results. The countdown didn't tick. It existed. Across the remaining ships of the system, every display showed the same silent structure. No seconds, no rhythm, just a shrinking margin of possibility. Not time passing. Time closing. High Commander stood alone at the command console now. The bridge around her was quieter than it had ever been in the history of the fleet. Fewer officers remained. Fewer voices dared to speak. Every decision had already been made for most of them. And the ship outside had simply responded. Not with rage. Not with escalation. With absence. Another vessel vanished from the tactical map. Then another. No explosions. No warnings. Just clean erasure from existence, as if the universe had quietly corrected itself. Closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, she spoke into the silence. Enough. The countdown did not react. Because it was not listening. It was waiting. Then, the human figure appeared again inside the ship's internal chamber. Closer now than before, as if distance itself had become less meaningful with each lesson. Its expression had not changed, but something in its presence had. Less observation. More expectation. You are approaching threshold. Stepped forward, we have ceased all hostile action. You have ceased movement, the voice corrected. A pause. Not intent. On the display, another ship flickered out. Its voice tightened. If intent is your measure, then you are assuming certainty where there is none. We are reacting to fear, not choosing violence. The human figure tilted its head slightly. Fear is not the problem. A beat. Unexamined fear is. The remaining fleet began to reorganize, not by command but instinctively. Survivors clustered closer together, trying to find safety in proximity, but proximity no longer mattered. Every vessel was still individually marked, individually evaluated. A junior officer spoke, voice trembling. Commander, we're being judged faster now. Looked at the display. The rate of disappearance had changed. Accelerated. Why, she whispered. The human voice answered. Because hesitation is also a choice. Another ship vanished. This one had not moved, not fired, not attempted escape. It had simply waited too long. The realization hit the bridge like physical impact. Even inaction is being counted, someone said quietly. Turned sharply, no, that's not what this is. But even as she spoke, she knew the truth was shifting beneath her certainty. The ship outside reoriented again. Its massive structure folding inward and outward simultaneously, like something calculating beyond linear thought. The glow at its core stabilized into something sharper, focused, deliberate. And then, the system itself reacted. The star dimmed fractionally again. But this time it wasn't random. It was synchronized with the countdown. Eyes widened. You're linking stellar output to behavioral assessment. The human figure responded immediately. We are linking consequence to awareness. Another ship disappeared. The fleet was now less than half. Panic did not rise anymore. It had burned itself out, replaced by something colder. Focus. Survival narrowed into thought. What is the threshold? Asked. Silence. Then, recognition. The word felt heavier than any weapon used against them so far. Recognition of what? She demanded. The answer came slowly. That your first response was wrong. A pause. And that you did it anyway. The bridge fell silent. Because now it was no longer about misunderstanding. It was about acknowledgement. And accountability. Another vessel vanished. This one had been transmitting continuous surrender codes. It did not matter. Stepped closer to the console. We acknowledge it now. The human figure turned slightly. Now is not when it began. The implication struck harder than anything before it. His voice softened. Then what do you want from us that we can still give? A long silence followed. The countdown slowed for the first time. Not stopped. Just hesitating. Then, change that survives contact with fear. The words lingered. Across the fleet, surviving ships stabilized slightly. No longer scattering, no longer fleeing, watching. Learning. Trying. Another disappearance occurred, but slower now, more deliberate, less frequent. Noticed it immediately. The rate is changing. Because observation is changing. The human figure stepped closer again. We are not here to eliminate reaction. A pause. We are here to eliminate inevitability. His breath caught. You think war between species is inevitable. History says yes. A flicker of images again. But shorter this time. Sharper. Moments of contact turning into conflict before dialogue could stabilize. Fear misinterpreting intent. Intent escalating fear. Always the same spiral. The countdown shrank again. But slower. Spoke carefully, then break the cycle with us. A pause. Longer than any before. The star above them pulsed faintly. And for the first time, the human voice was uncertain. That is what we are testing. The remaining ships held position. No one moved. No one fired. No one fled. And in that fragile silence, the universe waited to see if hesitation could become survival. The countdown hovered at its final threshold and did not fall. Yet the countdown stopped. Not abruptly. Not dramatically. It simply ceased shrinking. Across the shattered remnants of the system, silence replaced tension in a way that felt almost unreal. Ships that moments ago were vanishing now remained suspended, alive, intact, and very aware that survival had not been granted, but paused. High Commander didn't move for several seconds. Then she exhaled. Slow, controlled, because she understood something terrifying. They were still being watched. The massive human vessel hung beyond the fleet like a judgment that had not yet closed its book. Its structure no longer unfolded aggressively. Instead, it had settled, layered plates stabilizing, glowing veins dimming into a steady pulse. No longer a blade. Now a scale. Inside its internal chamber, the human figure appeared once more. But this time, it did not speak immediately. It looked at them, not as targets, not as data, but as something closer to possibility. Then finally, you did not complete the cycle. Stepped forward, we stopped firing, we stopped running, we stopped escalating. A pause. You stopped reacting. The distinction mattered. Everyone felt it. The human continued. That is not the same. Silence stretched again, but it was different now. No longer suffocating, no longer absolute. It was open, fragile in a way the galaxy had almost forgotten could exist. A surviving officer whispered, "Commander, what does that mean?" Didn't answer immediately, because she was still learning the shape of survival that didn't require victory. Then she spoke. "It means we are still here." The human figure tilted its head slightly. For now, no one flinched this time, because fear had changed form. It was no longer panic. It was responsibility. The star above them stabilized fully for the first time since the encounter began. Its light was no longer dimmed or manipulated. It burned as it always had, but now it felt, observed rather than controlled. Balanced, the human ship began to shift again, but not toward attack. Toward departure geometry. The fleet reacted instinctively, systems recalibrating, tracking, trying to understand if this was another phase. But raised her hand. "Do not move," she ordered. And for the first time in the entire encounter, the fleet obeyed without fear. The human voice returned, quieter now. You will remember this differently than we will. Nodded slowly. We will remember that we were not destroyed. A pause. Memory is not enough. A faint ripple moved through the human vessel, not threatening, not diagnostic. Final. You will rebuild your protocols. It wasn't a request. It was already known. Accepted it. Yes. Another pause. Then, and you will fail again. The words should have caused panic. Instead, they landed like truth. Because they understood now that perfection was not the expectation. Awareness was. Stepped closer to the viewport, looking out at the immense structure that had erased fleets, collapsed moons, and dimmed stars, not out of malice but calibration. What are you? She asked quietly. The human figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, the ship itself seemed to respond. We are what remains when survival learns from itself. A silence followed. Then, the vessel began to retract its influence across the system, slowly, carefully, like something releasing pressure it had been holding for far too long. The jump gates remained offline. The fleet remained intact, but isolated. Not punished, contained within consequence. One final marker appeared across all systems. Not a target lock. Not a warning. A record. First contact, intervention event complete. Looked at it. Is it over? The human figure paused. Long. Measured. Then. No. A final image appeared. Not of war. Not of destruction. But of countless systems across the galaxy. Each one marked. Each one unvisited. Each one unknown. And the implication was clear. This was not a singular encounter. It was a pattern correction protocol. His voice was soft now, and if we succeed. The human figure looked directly at her. For the first time, something almost like respect emerged. Then you will not need us again. The vessel outside began to fold into itself. Space bending, not violently but precisely. The tear that had brought it here began to reopen. But not like before. This time controlled. Stable. Raised her voice one last time. Will we ever meet again? A pause. The longest yet. Then, only if you forget. And with that, the ship vanished. No explosion. No light. No trace. Just absence. The system remained. The fleet remained. The star remained. But everything had changed. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then a junior officer finally whispered. Commander. Didn't look away from the empty space where the impossible ship had been. We just learned, she said quietly, that the galaxy does not forgive first mistakes. A pause. And now, we don't get to make them blindly anymore. Above them, the stars burned on. But somewhere far beyond sight, the galaxy was watching, waiting, to see who else would learn before it was too late. End.